Chicken Little from 2005 is almost unanimously considered to be the worst movie in the entire Disney animated canon, to the point that even those with a soft spot for it often can't deny that it's one of Disney's weaker efforts, encapsulating all the problems that had led to Disney's decline since their renaissance only a few years earlier, all wrapped up into one film. The infamy of this movie is such that Disney probably wishes that they could erase it entirely. But that being said, Disney could actually stand to learn a few things from why exactly this movie failed so badly. Because when you really look at it, it contains many of the same problems that Disney would start getting flack for only a decade later. And today, I'd like to try and point out how a lot of later Disney movies could have been way better had they actually tried to learn from their mistakes with Chicken Little instead of simply burying it. And there will be spoilers for both Chicken Little as well as quite a few Disney movies that came after it ahead. So in case there's something you've been meaning to see and don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. You have been warned. Okay, so to start off simply, one of the biggest complaints many famously have with Chicken Little is that apart from the titular character and maybe one or two of his friends, there's really nobody for the audience to root for. Sure, the narrative tries to say that almost everybody deserves sympathy, but considering they spend most of their screen time making Chicken Little's life miserable and acting like jerks, it's kind of hard to feel sorry for them even when they're seemingly killed by the aliens towards the end. And, of course, that's not even getting into how hated Buck Cluck is, considering he seems to be more worried about his reputation than trying to be a good father to his son. Even if he does eventually own up to it and apologize, many do believe he had already taken it too far beforehand. So once again, even if the narrative presents most of the characters as sympathetic in nature, their actions cause the audience to feel otherwise. Now, I already dedicated a whole separate video to explaining why that whole thing in and of itself is a problem, which you can find a link in the description to if you're interested. But to stay on topic, the point is that this is a problem that many later Disney movies would suffer from as well. Now, the most obvious example of this would definitely be Ralph Breaks the Internet, where Vanellope is let off scot-free by the narrative even though she's just as guilty of being selfish as Ralph is. But I also went over all of that in a separate video, which you can also find a link in the description to, so I won't go on another rant about that. And, of course, there are other such examples as Narami and Raya the Last Dragon, who many, myself included, will argue most definitely did not earn her redemption. And even Alma gets this reaction from certain people, if to a lesser extent. Because whether or not you agree with them, there are those who feel that, similar to Buck Cluck, she took things too far for a simple apology to make up for it. And the opposite has even happened in rare cases, with many saying that King Magnifico in Wish doesn't deserve to be seen as the villain, considering the paradise he created and only asking for a person's wish in return. Now, obviously, this one is a bit more muddled due to the movie suffering from various writing issues, but the point is that Chicken Little wouldn't be the last time characters written to be seen in a specific light would be met with a very hostile reaction by the audience due to their actions. And in the same vein, a major reason for that problem in many of those cases was a lack of a traditional villain. Because as I already went over in a separate video, which you can also find a link in the description to, many might not realize it, but an important role that a lot of good villains fill is making the heroic characters come across as more sympathetic because they're better than the bad guy. But when there is no villain, it makes the audience apt to be harsher on the actions of the other characters. And that's arguably another big reason why Chicken Little doesn't work. Due to the fact that there is no traditional bad guy, it makes the quote good characters' already more questionable actions seem even worse because there's nobody to make them look better in comparison to. And not to mention, the lack of a villain also needlessly causes several storytelling issues that could have easily been done a lot better had there been an actual villain to cause the conflict. Because as it stands, the closest thing the movie has to a villain is just a typical playground bully who gets an extremely disproportionate comeuppance, and the ones who appear to be the real villains are actually good people, with the whole thing simply being one big misunderstanding. And once again, that's another problem many later Disney movies would suffer from. The lack of a truly evil villain has negatively impacted several movies, such as Ralph Breaks the Internet, Raya and the Last Dragon, Strange World, and Moana 2. And the common denominator among most of these, as well as a few others I didn't list, is that the characters who would normally be seen as the bad guy are framed as being either sympathetic, misunderstood, or both. And said reveal has never worked as a benefit to their respective movies, just like in Chicken Little. So when you really look at it, Disney's villain problem can be traced all the way back to here, since the aliens look like villains, but the whole thing turns out to be a big misunderstanding, and thus the narrative tries to paint Foxy Loxy as the true bad guy to make up for it, leading to disastrous results that come at runt of the litter's expense. And finally, there's the fact that Chicken Little doesn't even feel like a Disney movie. Because it is widely well known, in the mid-2000s, Disney had been lagging behind their fiercest competitor DreamWorks. So their solution was to try and replicate DreamWorks' style as much as possible, taking a traditional fairy tale and adding irreverent and modern humor to it, as well as things completely out of left field such as baseball and an alien invasion, and topping it all off with ugly CGI. And needless to say, this attempt at trying to beat DreamWorks at their own game could only end in complete disaster on Disney's part. Because not only did they not understand what they were trying to duplicate, but the whole concept was one that audiences just weren't interested in seeing in the first place, especially from the likes of Disney. And once again, this would also become a problem for a lot of future Disney movies as well, and perhaps the biggest one of all at that. Because as I've dedicated countless videos to pointing out, due to Disney's acquiring most of Pixar's creative management when the former bought the latter, the results have led to a lot of Disney movies feeling more like Pixar in nature, which has led to many issues since Pixar's way of doing things is drastically different from the style Disney's always been known to use. So as a result, a lot of Disney movies released in the 2010s and early 2020s may superficially look like Disney films, but in actuality have a lot more in common with Pixar than anything else, and that is a problem. In fact, Disney and Pixar's clashing styles have led directly to the other problems I just went over in a few cases, and I will always maintain that said clashing was also a major reason why Wish ended up being such a narrative mess. When all anybody at Disney knows is how Pixar does things, how is one supposed to know how to write a more old-school Disney movie? I mean, they could have just consulted the writers of Once Upon a Studio, but I think you get my point here. So like I said before, when you really look at it, Disney didn't learn anything from the failure of Chicken Little, and went on to make a lot of the same mistakes with their movies not even a decade later. Now sure, the problems those movies suffer from aren't to the same extent as in Chicken Little, but the point still remains that a lot of their later movies could have been a lot better had they bothered to sit down and try to learn something from its failure. Because it might be sad to say, but considering the direction Disney has been going in the late 2010s and 2020s, the unspoken legacy of mistakes made in Chicken Little might just end up being one of the biggest contributions to the company if they don't get their act together. Okay, I think that covers everything. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that 2005's Chicken Little ended up foreshadowing a lot of the mistakes Disney movies in the following decades would go on to make? Or do you believe that's complete nonsense and that I'm being way too hard on the Disney movies that came after it? Please let me know in the comments below. Because you don't have to agree with anything in this video if you don't want to. You can feel about Chicken Little and the Disney movies that came after it however you want to, and if you think I had it all wrong, that is perfectly okay. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.